All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Lisa Naranjo, and I will be facilitating today's webinar on everyday mental health. This is, I forgot what number we're on in our series, but we've had quite a few webinars with a lot of great feedback, and this is one on a presentation that I've offered several times out in the community and to schools and churches who just really want to know some fundamental stressors and challenges that folks deal with in their everyday lives, and how does that impact immediately, but also potential long-term effects. And so I'm going to address that today. Going to talk about how everyday life stress, life events, challenges make an impact on our mental health, but now add another layer of current situations that we're in that compound that stress that could make it possibly more challenging for one to deal with day-to-day activities. So thank you for joining me today. I'm just going to start again with some housekeeping tips. If you've been on this webinar or attended our webinars in the past, this is familiar language for you, but just want to give the disclaimer that all the participants, the attendees who are joining us today, your mics and cameras will be on mute. And the reason why you're on mute is because we are recording this presentation, and it will be posted on our webpage within the next 24 to 48 hours when the recording is done. I highly encourage and hope that throughout this presentation you feel comfortable to ask a question. There is no wrong question. All questions are valid and have some great information. I encourage you to use the Q&A box on the very bottom of your screen. There should be a box that says Q&A. Please use that to type in your questions. Jessica, who is co-facilitating with me today, she will be addressing those questions behind the scene, or we will address them as a whole group. My goal is to, by the end of this webinar, any questions you may have, that they would be addressed before we end today. As always, if you are looking for immediate support, may yourself be in some distress or know someone who's in distress who could use some support immediately, I encourage you to call Tri-City's main number. It's the 866 number on the slide, 623-9500. That's our toll-free number to our main clinic, where someone there could direct you to speak to someone based on the needs you have. And of course, if it's a crisis where immediate support is needed, I highly encourage you to call 911 for support. Also, at the very end of this webinar, there will be a second link on your web browser for SurveyMonkey. I would really appreciate if you take a moment to answer the questions on SurveyMonkey. We're always looking for feedback and how we can improve our webinars moving forward. And again, just thank you for your attendance, your time this afternoon. It's a very nice day. Today is supposed to be really warm today, so depending on how you like the weather, this is a great day, or it's going to be a brutal day, as we're supposed to be near the hundreds. Okay, so course objectives. These are just some highlights I like to share before we get into the presentation. If you signed up for Everyday Mental Health, this is the content we're going to talk about. We're going to look at some fundamental knowledge about mental health in adults and youth. And I think youth is important because youth are being impacted with day-to-day stressors as young as 10 and younger. So we definitely want to look at the impact on them. We want to look at the most common diagnosed disorders that folks are diagnosed with, but also know that you don't have to be diagnosed to have some of these symptoms that could impact your everyday well-being. And then last, how can you support yourself first and then support someone else who may be struggling? And then how does COVID-19 make an impact on us? And it's made a substantial impact on our lives. And we want to address and acknowledge that in this presentation today. So just some quick background on mental illness, and some of these statistics you may be familiar with, some of them you may not have heard of before. I'm not going to go over every one specifically, but just take a moment to look at the slide. This is a source that came from NAMI.org, has a lot of great information and statistics on their webpage. But the reality is mental illness impacts everyone. And in fact, 1 in 5 adults in the US experience a mental illness in any given year. So that's a large percentage of our population, of adults specifically, who have been impacted with some mental health challenges. For youth ages 13 to 18, that's 1 in 6 who experience a mental health disorder at some point during their life span. So again, that's a lot of youth that are being impacted. And another thing to keep in mind with adults specifically, that among the 20 million adults who experience a substance use disorder have a co-occurring mental illness. And so that's really helpful to know, especially right now, what we're going through. There's been a lot of reports and studies and statistics that show that right now there has been an increase of substance use, abuse, and dependency due to COVID-19 for various reasons, the impact it has on their lives. So unfortunately, some folks may turn to some substance to self-cope when they're trying to maybe minimize or reduce the stress of anxiety or of depression, anxiety that they may be experiencing, which is a negative coping skills that we discourage, but hopefully folks are getting the help they need. And then just on the other side, only 41% of adults in the U.S. who have a mental health condition received services in the last year. So less than half of people who are suffering from a mental illness, only 41% receive services and support, which is very low. And when you think about the numbers, 1 in 5 who are impacted, but less than half receive support, there's a lot of people who are suffering in silence, who are going about their day, struggling with challenges that if they had the right resources and support systems in place, could be getting help that they need. For children, over half who have a mental health condition don't receive services for between ages 8 to 15. And again, that is a large percentage of children who are going unserved and untreated. And what we do know, the prolonged someone goes without receiving treatment has longer consequences and health disparities. And the last thing, just to point out that anyone who is struggling with a mental health challenge or who does have a diagnosable illness, on average, they wait 10 years from the very first onset of the symptoms to the point that they go in and seek treatment. And we look at that, 10 years is a very long time, a decade of suffering, challenging themselves in ways that may not have been necessary, lack of services and support. And when we look at mental health and we compare it to other health disparities, if we waited 10 years to treat cancer, to treat diabetes or heart disease, there is a good chance that we would probably not live 10 years. So there's a huge gap in receiving services, which again, the reason why we do these presentations is to acknowledge that mental health impacts everyone. Do not delay or prolong getting help and treatment, because the most common mental illnesses that are out there are preventable and treatable, and the earlier the better for support and services. So there's quite a bit of mental health disorders. I'm not going to go through every disorder that the DSM-5 has that people can be diagnosed with. I'm really just focusing on the 2 most common disorders that, one, people are diagnosed with, but again, even if you don't have a diagnosis, doesn't mean that you may not experience some of the symptoms, the signs, the setbacks that these illnesses present. So we have anxiety and depression, and also they commonly co-occur together, which means when people do seek treatment, there's a good possibility that they would be diagnosed with both of these disorders at one time. So 18% of adults who experience one disorder in a year for anxiety, 6.9, almost 7% of adults who experience depressive disorder in a year. And these percentages, you can take them for what they are. They are percentages of people who have received services and support. If we look back at the previous slide, people don't get help or treatment. For adults, more than half do not seek support or services or treatment, and children about half. So these percentages, again, could look very different if more people were accessing treatment services for their mental health challenges that they have. So what should we know? Well, what we should know about these two disorders specifically is, again, that they're common. If you have had stressful life experiences, there is a chance that you might have felt depression or anxiety. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means that you're human and you have emotions, and challenging times, people deal with them in different ways. But when we look at depression specifically, it's a common illness that negatively affects how you feel, the way you think, and how you act. It can cause feelings of sadness, loss of interest in activities once enjoyed, can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems, and can decrease a person's ability to function at work and or at home. The good news is that this is treatable. They are both treatable. But when going back to where we are currently, this is everyday mental health, and the current status of where we're at due to COVID-19, due to the social injustice and unrest that people are experiencing right now. There is a lot of emotions, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration that many Americans are feeling. And so I want to say it's very normal that people may have bouts of depression at this time. And so if you are here to support yourself or to support someone, I think just even acknowledging that saying this is normal, and normalize it, but invalidate their feelings and invalidate that experience, because people have been confined in their homes or wherever they find shelter to be safer at home, may not be aware of these new feelings, emotions that they're experiencing, and may be struggling with, what is it? I can't get rid of it. I don't know what's wrong, and may not even think that it's some type of symptoms of depression they're experiencing. When we look at anxiety, it's a normal reaction to stress that can be beneficial in some situations, which we'll get to in a minute. But again, anxiety and stress, if there is anyone who is listening and can honestly say they have not had any experience with stress, please tell us what you do. Put it in the Q&A and share with us how you've been able to stay stress-free during especially this time of day and age where we're at. I would really like to hear how you're managing that, because that's a huge accomplishment if you're able to do that. But like myself and many others, stress, it's not when it happens, it's how often and how can I manage it day to day, hour to hour, depending on what's going on in my personal and professional life. But how it can be beneficial, first and foremost, it can alert us in dangers and help us prepare and pay attention. So it keeps us on alert. Anxiety is highly activated survival response. It activates our fight, flight, or free response to stay away from danger, stay safe, find a safe and security in what we're avoid a dangerous situation. That's the benefit of anxiety. The other downfall, it involves excessive fear and worry. There is no relief of the danger. Even if you do feel safe, your anxiety is highly activated to worry about worrying. It tells about potential fears, potential worries. It looks to the future, refers to anticipation of a future concern, and it's more associated with distress you may feel in your body and behavior as far as avoidance. So again, the anxiety is normal and we all experience it differently, but for a lot of adults and youth are very anxious, because right now we are living in an uncertain world right now. Day to day, people are glued to the news trying to figure out, is it safe to go outside? Is it safe to go to the grocery store? Should I be still sheltering at home? If I wear a mask, what does that mean? If I don't wear a mask, what does that mean? Getting access to services that you may need at this current time is very anxiety provoking. And so just want to acknowledge that with where we're at today, a lot of folks may be feeling very anxious about the unknown, about the uncertainty, and that is normal. But hopefully, what can we do to one, acknowledge it, and what can we do to take care of that today? And hopefully we'll get to that by the end of this webinar. So what else should we know? Again, just to highlight the problems developed during adolescence and late adolescence. So, there is this myth that, it's only adults or only adults are suffering. And maybe that's because they waited 10 years. So if you're 22 and you now are diagnosed with an illness, there's a good chance you've had these symptoms and had felt the impact prior to your current age of 22. You probably were experiencing these when you're 12, 14, 15 years old. So they do develop very young. A lot of kids are being stressful. And for those of you who do have children who have been home because school has, do homeschooling now, may have seen a change in your children or your child's behavior because they just don't know how to deal with this uncertain time of their normal routine did a 180, and now they are at home every day, not seeing their friends, not engaging in their regular routine with their classmates, their teachers, the lesson plans. So it could be very stressful for young adults as well. Adults experience it differently. So again, just acknowledge that you may have to ask some questions and have conversations about how they're feeling, what they're experiencing, what does it mean for them to have to stay home? What does it mean? How does that make them feel that they can't go to school? Because every kid is different. And if you have multiple kids, you may find that one child sees it differently, the other one is not so impacted, and that's okay too. The sooner any individual gets help, the more likely to have a positive income. And I know that's really hard right now, but there are a lot of great resources, and we'll get to resources at the end, or even right now, if you feel that you yourself or your children or young adults in your life are struggling, that there are supportive services that you can access during this time through telehealth, online webinars, online support groups, that you can start accessing support and services now. You don't have to wait to go to a physical location to get support and services. And lastly, we know a lot of people why they wait so long. One, because of lack of knowledge about mental health challenges, but another reason why folks may take a while is just because of this discrimination, the stigma that is associated with mental health is a huge barrier for people to receive services. And before they even receive services, it's a huge barrier as to why they don't share with anyone what they're feeling, what their struggles are, how it's making an impact on their daily lives, why they try so hard to mask and hide how they're really feeling day to day, because they don't want anyone to think less of them. They themselves may be ashamed of this. So the moment we can start to normalize, and that's why I always say start the conversation, ask them how they're doing, open up a space for a safe dialogue where there's genuine concern, because that might really benefit someone who's struggling but just didn't know how to speak up and speak out about what they're going through. How do you know when someone is experiencing a mental crisis? So again, some of you, the reason why you came today is because I just not sure what I should do for myself or for someone who's struggling. How do I help? And I just acknowledging that there's a challenge, acknowledging that you're experiencing emotions, physical discomfort, emotional discomfort at this time, acknowledging it and sharing it. That I feel is the best thing anyone could do at this time, is to say, you're not alone. I am struggling too, or I have struggled in the past, and this is what has helped me. It's kind of like just sharing resources and having healthy conversations. Even though we are being physically distant, I hope we are still able to connect socially through phone, text, Zoom. If you do feel safe to have a face-to-face conversation within a safe distance, start having conversations, checking in with each other, so they feel less intimidated and less fearful to share what they're going through. So just to bring some awareness, and again, we're not going to talk about every disorder. We're just talking about in general how day-to-day stress makes an impact. And I do want to again acknowledge that due to COVID-19, the pandemic that we're in, many of us have never experienced a pandemic. None of us had to be isolated at home, confined to one specific area, minimize the interactions, physical interactions that we have with people we know, people we don't know. So it is a very stressful time. And untreated and unsupported, it could be very frustrating for individuals. So some things to take in consideration is what's really different are you noticing about an individual? If it's someone that you see on a regular basis, what are things that you are seeing? And then if it's things that you hear in conversation. But just know that these mood disorders that we're going to be talking about, it impacts all areas of our life: work, daily activities, and satisfying relationships. And what can you pay attention to two things that you can really focus on are the symptoms and the signs. And symptoms is more internal. So this is where I encourage you to have conversations, because this is where the symptoms that the person is experiencing may have to share with you. And they may talk about how they're feeling, emotions that are maybe not be as visible as others, their experience, their thoughts. They may have negative thoughts. They may feel guilt, shame. They may be really embarrassed and frustrated. And so these are symptoms that they're feeling internally that you will be aware of if you have a conversation. The next thing is our signs. Like, what do you really see and hear when you do engage with them and you do connect with them? What are they doing or not doing? And think about, pre-March, back in January, February, what was their engagement like? What was their demeanor like? What was their tone like? And now when you see them or you speak to them, it may look very different. It may sound very different. And we're going to just look at a few things that you may have seen or experienced, or just be mindful and aware of when you are engaging with someone, that these could be a sign or symptom of depression or anxiety or any distress that they're experiencing. So we have a physical, emotional, and socially. So if they're complaining a lot about headaches, muscle aches, tension, not sleeping enough, maybe sleeping too much, changes in their eating, their day-to-day activities physically, just ask them about that. Just be aware of that. Just be mindful of that you're acknowledging that you're noticing that, and also really encourage them to still see the doctor. I know a lot of people are fearful of going to a doctor right now, but again, if these are constant, persistent physical pains that they're experiencing, encourage them to go see their doctor, or at least call their doctor and get some help through telehealth to assess what could be going on. Emotionally, they may feel very sad, irritable, angry, fearful, mood swings. Again, this is just, what's not typical, their behavior emotionally. If they're very sad and angry and acting in a way that's not their normal self, then have conversations about how they're doing, that you've noticed that and that you're concerned. I think if you come from an approach of concern and really want to help and support, hopefully that gives people an opportunity to share what they're experiencing. Socially, this may be very challenging. I mean, we have been asked to stay socially distant, or if we are face-to-face, to still have some distance between us. But again, these are things that you can also pay attention to, even just through conversation. Maybe they're not picking up their call. Maybe they're not responding to your text as frequently. Maybe they've been distant, that they're so isolated that no one has heard from them. Maybe that should be a concern, that you really try to reach out to them to get them to check in on them. Doesn't seem motivated, maybe starts to develop a dependency to a substance that is not good for their health. They are not only disconnecting from social media, but they're disconnecting from their support groups, from their family, from their friends. So again, socially withdrawing from the point where you're concerned because you haven't been in communication with them. So keeping that going. This right here, I feel is probably an image that we can all relate to some degree, where we're feeling in our body. For a lot of us, we may be going about our day to day, and emotionally we're fine, but man, I feel like my body's taking a beating and I don't know why. I know for myself, this past week I've had a tremendous amount of muscle tension in my neck, to the point where I've had to put heat on it and massage it and stretch it out, just because it's so tense and tight. And just acknowledging that, like, this is an area where 2 weeks ago was not a concern, where this week it's really making an impact on me, because it's causing tension and distress, and just making me uncomfortable, to be honest. But when we talk about people and where it's impacted them, acknowledging that it can impact any part of our body, and what can we do to take care of ourselves. So this is more looking at anxiety specifically, but again, heart racing, feeling fatigue, having a nauseous, upset stomach, restlessness, blurred vision, dizziness, mind racing, sweating uncontrollably, within reason. Now, if they just went outside and ran, that's different. But if they are in a cool place and they still have sweaty palms or sweat preparation, a lot of perspiration, happening, then that might be a concern. This is also too, again, where I would say that people may be fearful to seek professional help, especially someone that they're familiar with, like their primary care doctor. Highly encourage them to call their doctor. If they feel safe to go into the doctor's visit to get examined, that would be great. If not, I know a lot of doctors are doing stuff virtually. Telehealth has increased tremendously through these last 3 months, that doctors can go online and do some type of exam through video conferencing. So just encourage them to do that, because we don't know. It could be a medical problem that is not being addressed. But if it's not a medical problem, then what else can we do to support their anxiety, the stress that they're experiencing right now? Before I move forward, I just want to pause and ask Jessica if there's any questions that have come out during this time.
Hi, Lisa. At this moment, we don't have any questions.
All right, thank you, Jessica.
Welcome.
So this is where, again, we can use the Q&A just real quick. If anyone wants to just share what has been your experience when you or someone you know is in distress. So I feel right now a lot of people who are quarantined together may be experiencing a lot of things in their loved ones that they maybe never noticed before. Really maybe having a lot of distress happening. And it could be over minor things. I mean, it could be the fact that we ran out of milk and how am I going to get milk? And that could just set someone off, just little things that are not that big of a deal, but seem to be a huge deal when we're in distress. So what has been experienced when you or someone has been in distress? What has worked? What are some challenges? What do you need? If anyone feels comfortable just addressing that real quick, I'll give you a second to use the Q&A box, and it gave me a chance to get some water. But what have you been experiencing, and what has worked, or what has been a challenge, and maybe today we can find you some good resources and tools to use to get through that. Did anyone want to share, Jessica, at this time, or should we just keep on moving?
We don't have anything.
Okay. Well, things come up. So just one thing, what has worked? What are some challenges? What support do you need? Those are questions, if you could, just write them down and just think about when you're connecting with loved ones or friends or family that you are concerned about. These are just some pretty open-ended questions that you can share with them. And what I always say, always just use my own personal experiences when I start conversations with what I've experienced during this difficult time. It kind of puts people's guards down and allows them to feel a little more safer to share how they feel about certain situations. And again, prior to COVID-19, everyday stress with whether it be work, school, relationships, responsibilities, transitions, big life events that have happened have been very stressful. Then put COVID-19, physical distancing restrictions, shelter at home, safer at home, change in work, change in school, change in our access to day-to-day things that we were so normal, used to getting accustomed, like going to get a cup of coffee, like going for a walk and not being concerned about the environment around us. And then unfortunately, 2-3 weeks ago of having a social unrest that we are currently in, where people are frustrated, fed up, angry, sad, and really want to see change happening. Compile all those things that have happened in a short amount of time. In 3 months, everyone's world has done a drastic change. If you are experiencing that, it's going to have an impact, and how we address that and how we take care of ourselves will make a huge difference. So what can I do? So here are some helpful things and not helpful things to keep in mind. So, always people just ask, what are some simple things I can say? I want to help someone. I just don't know what I should say. I don't know how to approach the person. And, it's very simple. I wish it was more complicated, but it's not. And first and foremost, I always say, if you really are concerned and genuinely want to help someone, there's a good chance you're not going to do anything wrong. The only wrong thing you're going to do is not speaking up and asking them a question. But you can keep it safe. Some helpful questions is just, how have you been? Just acknowledging that, this is a stressful time. So how have you been during this situation? More specifically, how have you been adjusting to COVID-19? Just letting people vent and express that. We've had to go through these changes willingly or unwillingly, but it still has an impact. Maybe something open-ended, like I've noticed these past few weeks, you've just been really distant. You haven't answered my calls. You haven't responded to my emails. And this is not like you. So just what have you noticed? Changes in them. You haven't seen yourself, and I'm concerned about you. Those are, I think, very safe, very helpful things that you can do. Actions you can take: call, text, or visit with them if you feel safe to do so. I know there's been times where I'll text and I'm like, I'm just going to call them. I just really miss hearing their voice. When I get on Zoom to have video chats, I get excited just to see people's faces I haven't seen in a while. So, go above and beyond to try to reach out to them. Send a care package. It's nice to just get a little something in the mail from a loved one saying, I'm thinking of you, I miss you, here's your favorite book, a book that I found that I want to share with you. Remind them that you're here to support them, and share activities that you can do together, whether virtually or in person. Now, some things that you probably shouldn't say or do, and unfortunately we may have done it because we ourselves are also frustrated and fatigued and stressed out, but be mindful of the words you choose, because words can do some serious damage, and what's wrong with you could be a not so helpful thing to say to someone. Why are you in such a bad mood could be very unhelpful. I don't like how you've been acting lately. Now, some of these may be true statements, and I'm not going to lie. Some of these may be like, in the back of your head, this is what you have. But again, if you want to come from a space of compassion and support and empathy, those are some comments and questions you may not want to say aloud to the person you're frustrated with. Actions that you shouldn't do is deny care or support. Refusing that, taking that away, that could be very unhealthy and it could be more damaging. So try not to do that. Ignore unhealthy behavior. If they are starting to use some substance, use it more than normal, start to develop dependency to it, talk about it, let them know you're concerned about it. Just don't ignore it. Don't start making threats, threatening to take things away from them, threatening to harm them or hurt them in a maybe emotionally. So just any threats really are not necessary and shouldn't be done. Punish them for things they can't control. Again, for a lot of people, they're experiencing different emotions, different reactions that they've never experienced before. And it's not that they are acting out to be vindictive. They're just acting out because they don't know what else to do. So try not to punish them for doing something that they themselves really at that time don't have control over. I'm going to quickly go over adults in the workplace. And so this might be a little something to take into mind, that even though a lot of folks are still working at their job sites or working from home, if they are suffering from depression, anxiety, or other mental health challenges, no matter where they're doing work, it's going to be impacted. Their performance and productivity may decrease, suffer, and it may be challenging for them to get normal day-to-day tasks done. Engage in their work. They may find a disinterest in their work, which makes them not want to do their job. Lack of communication with coworkers. They're supposed to attend a meeting. They're supposed to get on the conference call. They didn't attend Zoom for a meeting, and so that could be a challenge for them. And then physically, they may just not have the energy to even get out of bed, even though they're working from home. The fact that they're so in distress that the ability just to get out of bed, to get on their computer, to answer the phone can be very debilitating. So just keep that in mind as well. These are just some statistics that I have when it comes to workplace and some of the common disorders that we've talked about. Depression impairs abilities to complete physical job tasks about 20% of the time, and reduces its cognitive performance about 35% of the time. 57% of employees who report moderate depression and 40% of those who report severe depression receive treatment to control depression symptoms. So that's again, it's a little more than half, but again, that's still a low percentage of people who probably do have access to support through their employer and yet still do not seek treatment. Looking at youth specifically, the reason why I talk about youth is because for a lot of parents, this has probably been the most time you spent with your kid. Usually they go to school, you go to work, and a good chunk of your day is apart, and then you see each other for a couple hours in the afternoon, and then you're done. So now literally waking up and spending a whole day, a whole week together, you may start to notice some things that you've never noticed before just because you didn't have the ability to connect with them in this way. And why it's so important that we do it early is to get them the help that they need. And the reality is there's been an increase in pre-kindergarten referrals in our school systems, but only 23% of pre-K programs have on-site psychiatrists or psychologists. So there's been a huge increase, but the access to services is still very limited. And as a parent, as a caregiver, hopefully you're advocating to get them connected to the professional help, whether it be through the school or through your insurance. Being at risk for mental health problems in first grade leads to a 5% dropout in academic performance in just 2 years. So that's, a drop in their performance in 2 years, which kind of is a snowball effect as they get older. And then the higher risk, high school dropouts are 63 times more likely to be jailed than four-year college graduates. So this is just a long-term effect. We can see there's an increase in pre-kindergarten. And if you go through kindergarten, elementary, junior high, and now high school with no treatment, no support, no diagnoses, no services, unfortunately, the trajectory does not look very well. That they're more likely to probably be a high school dropout, get in trouble with the law, and unfortunately in our jail system. That's the trajectory of our youth if things don't go untreated and supported as early as kindergarten, which is 5 years old. So some long-term effects for youth that we want to be mindful of is that emotional behavioral problems can lead to discipline, referrals, school avoidance, suspension, and being held back. And we know once students are being held back, there's a greater risk that they may not finish or continue to have problems in school. Mental health and learning disorders can also lead to students to drop out of school entirely. And so the consequence of these school-related disciplines could unfortunately go down the road of underemployment or unemployment, prison, or a reduced quality of life. Unfortunately, they may pick up unhealthy coping skills, habits that could be health threatening, health damaging, and can reduce their quality of life, higher risk of STDs, substance dependency, misuse of drugs that could lead to unfortunate health disparities or unfortunately a shorter lifespan. So that is our everyday mental health pre-COVID-19, and now we're into COVID-19. And so how do we address that response to also impact your everyday mental health? And so these are just some statistics that were shared through research that have done, talking about we are already suffering, and then what's the trajectory of continued future suffering. And so I thought these were just some interesting statistics that wanted to share. 70% of adults say it's disrupting their lives a lot or some. These are for adults specifically. 39% say they lost a job or income. And, just the reports, how you look at it, a chance of a recession happening is very, very likely that we will be in a recession due to losses of jobs and income. I know unemployment rates have skyrocketed substantially these past 3 months since COVID-19 has made an impact. 45% say it's affected their mental health negatively. So this is, again, just due to COVID-19, not considering all the other day-to-day stressors that we've been dealing with prior to COVID-19, and not looking at our current status as far as the political climate that we're in. And then future, 74% say the worst is yet to come. So there's a good percentage of people who are still, again, that anxiety, the future, the worry of what's to come, the unknown. 74% feel the worst is not yet to come, and that's a high percentage. 79% worry the pandemic will trigger a recession, which we know is pretty much true. We most likely will be in some form of recession economically. And 82% fear the nation's healthcare system will be overrun. Again, just for some pockets of populations, underserved populations already don't have adequate access to basic needs. And with the pandemic, there's a fear that there will be a greater chance of not having access to services that are much needed, especially for the mental health and well-being. I'm quickly going to show, this is a 5-minute video that talks about COVID-19 and our mental health. I thought it was very informative, and hopefully you can hear, and we'll get started.
While countries around the world continue to mobilize to contain the spread of COVID-19, mental health experts say we can't lose sight of an equally alarming issue: the long-term mental health impact the pandemic is going to leave on society.
What I think we're facing here is a very traumatic event for a lot of people. It's a traumatic societal event for people. And one thing that we know about trauma is that while it's happening, you do whatever you can do to survive. You bear down and you just get through it, which is what we're all trying to do right now. I think that we're still very much in the trauma phase, the active trauma phase of this pandemic.
But what happens after physical distancing measures are lifted? What comes after the pandemic is over and people are able to get back to whatever their normal may be?
There's going to be residual stress, depression, certainly financial pressures, learning how to re-engage with the world in this new way. That's going to be difficult for a lot of people, and those are exactly the kinds of risk factors that lead to increasing rates of depression, anxiety, and even suicide.
The rapid spread of the pandemic gave little chance to prepare for or even process all that has happened in terms of job losses and the complete uprooting of everyday life and relationships. Maggie Hu is a student at McMaster University who suffers from a generalized anxiety disorder.
I shut down because of I don't know what to do. I'm not prepared for this. I did not run a rehearsal of the situation in my head. It's exhausting to not worry because it is practically impossible for me to not worry.
Hennick says for those already suffering from anxiety and depression, the pandemic could be exacerbating their symptoms. He is also concerned for those who have never suffered from any mental health issues in the past and are now facing a life disruption without fully digesting the long-term impact this may have on them. A large body of scientific studies show that there is a close relationship between indicators such as unemployment, mental health, and suicide. Research out of the Great Recession of 2008 reveals that a 1% increase in unemployment was accompanied by a 1% increase in the rates of suicides in the U.S. Hennick explains there is a peak and a valley response in our nervous system when faced with trauma. Right now, we are at a peak in which we are engaging with the immediate threat of the pandemic. You go into survival mode, which can be very taxing on a person's mental health.
And in fact, it doesn't actually let you think through or process what's happening to you. Its only interest is in keeping you alive and keeping you safe.
Once the pandemic is over, there will be a valley in which we recover from that threat. But the problem is, going back to baseline without support can take a lot longer than we may think. After the threat passes, Hennick says people can start to retreat or fall into depression or find many other ways of dissociating themselves with the trauma they experienced.
It can really become almost an infection on its own. Some people stay stuck either way at the top of that peak, or they stay stuck down at the bottom, or anywhere in between. Not everybody returns to baseline, and that's where we become concerned about mental illness.
In Canada, we currently have universal medical care, but things like psychotherapy, which Hennick says has proven to be an effective treatment for mental health problems, generally isn't funded publicly. Hennick says the federal and provincial governments need to step up to make sure proper treatments and programs are funded, so as many people as possible have access when in need, adding that everyone, including employers, will have to play a role.
I think it's important for employers in particular to realize when we start to loosen some of the restrictions that we're currently facing, that this needs to happen slowly, that we can't go back to the way the world was overnight.
As for Maggie, she says she already knows she won't be able to go from 0 to 100 right away.
I hope that with the virus slowly dying down, my social supports like psychiatrist, counselor, therapist, I'll get those supports back slowly and help me with my current fears and uncertainties.
Thanks for watching. To stay up to date on the latest breaking national and international news, be sure to subscribe.
Okay, so I just want to highlight a few things, and I liked Maggie's part in this about her anxiety. She brought up a good point. You know, for folks who suffer from anxiety, we are overachievers in the sense we plan for everything. We don't like to be blindsided. We don't like to be caught off guard. Part of the illness is we worry about worrying. We worry about everything that we could tangibly see or not even see. We just, always have an escape plan, a backup plan for a backup plan. And so, when you throw in a pandemic that we would never experience, and for a lot of us, we're caught off guard, it really throws us in a tailspin of not being able to do what we feel comfortable doing, which is planning and preparing, which is a huge challenge, and that many folks who may be experiencing right now, who maybe didn't even realize that they had bouts of anxiety, but that's part of the fear and frustration, is just the unknown part of it. And then secondly, just the correlation that as unemployment rates go up, so do suicide rates. And that is a reality that we are in. And we know that we had a tremendous increase in unemployment. And so as a provider, as a mental health provider, how do we reach out and support folks who are struggling and suffering? So the impact of suicide attempts and ideation and completions hopefully can be reduced or minimized as much as we can. Before I move on, just want to see if there was a question that anyone had from the video or anything up to this point. Jessica, do we have a question, or can I move on?
No, you can move on, Lisa. There's no questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So here's just a list of positive factors for mental illness may include. These are just some things to keep in mind, whether you have them already in place or something you could start working towards to include to help your well-being. Just some good self-esteem, just being positive, being kind to yourself, be gentle, acknowledge that this is very new, this is very raw, this is very emotional. So just do the best you can with what you have, and have that positive reinforcement that you're not alone in this. Healthy practices, again, which could be a challenge, sustaining a healthy diet may be challenging. I know myself, I get into phases where I want to bake everything under the sun, and then I have 5 different types of breads that I do not need in my house. So try to get rid of it, but try to maintain a healthy diet. Get some really good exercise. If you feel safe to go outside for a walk or do things outdoors, enjoy the sun, enjoy this nice weather that we're having, or even sign up for online exercise challenges and work groups that you could do from your home. And sleep hygiene is huge. I know for some folks that is a huge challenge. To get a good night's rest can do such wonders for the body, the mind, and the soul. So I encourage you to do that if you can. Avoid negative habits such as alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. Try to have a regular routine. I know it's really hard, but try to still go to bed at a decent hour, wake up at a decent time, as you were if you were going to go to school, if you were going to go to work. Get up and get that nice cup of coffee. Hopefully you change out of your pajamas at some point throughout the day, and stick to your routine. Check your emails, get your phone calls, do some type of routine, some normalcy, so your body can respond like, this is familiar, this is what I'm used to. Finding a really good support system is very, very helpful. A support system in place, whether it be online, virtually, through colleagues, through family, friends, or even if you live in a really great neighborhood and you do have good relationships with your neighbors, connect with them. Community bonding, for sure. Do events that are outdoors with some physical distancing in mind, so you can engage and interact but still stay safe. And ultimately, hopefully, everyone on this call or who is struggling at least has one person that they feel connected to, feel safe to, and can share some challenges and struggles that they're going through, because that could be very beneficial when trying to get through a difficult time like COVID-19. This last video that I'm going to show is, again, just some helpful tips. It just kind of reinforces what I just talked about, but from another source that with some other great tips.
In addition to some of the historical, intergenerational, contemporary trauma that people are living with, this event in and of itself can also be triggering for people. So I imagine that there are a number of people out there right now who really find their levels of distress and anxiety, growing almost by the day. For our people, emotional health is also about being in balance, mentally, physically, and spiritually. So some of the best things that people can do is try to do positive coping behaviors in all of those different areas. So, social distancing doesn't exclude people from going outside for a walk, for example, and you can walk with another person as long as you try to maintain that distance. Or it can be quite helpful to people to go for a reflective, mindful walk on their own. We're asking people as best they can to try to eat as well as they can and drink lots of fluids, try to get the proper amount of sleep. But as far as people's emotional and mental health, I think one of the best things people can do is to be as informed as possible without necessarily spending 24 hours a day, on your iPad, on the internet, listening to news channels. Give yourself, some hours a day dedicated to activities that make you feel good. That could be a whole number of different things depending on who you are.
So this next slide just kind of are some talking points that I've said or the video talked about. A few other things. Take time to unwind. I know that was a huge challenge working from home, of finding that break. Usually when I leave the office and drive home, that was my time to unwind and get ready for my other hat that I wear of being a wife and a mother. But working from home, there is no break. I don't get to leave and come back. So really making a conscious time to unwind and take care of yourself, give yourself a break during these transitions. Still set some goals, really try to do things professionally and personally, whether it be simple things. Maybe you want to take an online course. Maybe you want to read a new book. Maybe you want to do a self-care activity for yourself. So just set some goals and prioritize for yourself, taking care of your body, and then connecting with others. Try to do that as much you can when you feel really doing it for yourself, but also to connect with others. And then focus on the facts. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of great information, and then there's a lot of information that can be misleading. So just stick to the facts. And I like what she said, just be informed, but don't let that be your world 24/7. Some great resources that, as we wrap up, we have about a minute here that I want to share. Tri-City, it has been open this whole time and has been providing services to our community partners in Pomona, Laverne, and Claremont. And so definitely want to acknowledge that we are here. We're here to support. We're here to provide services and support to folks who are looking for resources and information. So we have our navigators, our community navigators, who do a lot of great linkage and referral to resources for needs that are most needed right now, which is food, medical, and treatment for even healthcare providers as well. So you can contact them. They're available. This is their 888 number that you can call toll free to speak to a navigator. A well-being supportive chat we have for non-emergency situations. You can call Monday through Friday. This is Tri-City's main number. You can also call the 888 number that I gave earlier in the presentation, but this is the same one. It's just not our toll-free number, but it gets us to our main office, and you can ask to speak to someone for supportive services, and they can connect you to the staff, Chris Anzalone, who refers to different programs and services that we do for free currently in the community. And then last, we have our 24/7 crisis support services. So if you are a client, you call this number, you can speak to your therapist. If you're not a client but just need immediate support in crisis, they will connect you to a therapist to do some type of assessment and to see how they can support you moving forward. And so I apologize if I'm going really fast. I'm just trying to be mindful of folks' time. I just want to say thank you again for coming on and listening and giving me an hour of your day. I greatly appreciate it and don't take it for granted. Tri-City does webinars every Tuesday in English and every Thursday in Spanish. So if you're interested in participating in future webinars, I encourage you to go to our webpage. The information here is on this slide that you can go to. All the webinars that we've done have been recorded, and they can be found on our webpage as well, that you can go back and view at another time, or maybe share with someone that you think this would be beneficial for them to listen in and do. So again, don't forget to complete the survey at the very end. Take a minute to do that. Thank you for your time. And then Jessica, before I end, is there any questions that were put in the Q&A box?
The meeting y tocamos y ya nomás cuando te di el des ya no necesito medio para.
Jess, was there questions or no?
No, Lisa, no questions. Sorry about
Thank you. No, thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. It's 12:01. I apologize for running a minute over, but thank you for your time. Please don't forget to do the survey, and we'll see you next week. Next week, our topic will be on, I believe, motivational interviewing. So hopefully you'll join us next Tuesday at 11 o'clock.